Tonight, it's my great pleasure to introduce a mycologist who's quite a rock star amongst the online mycological community, Alan Rockefeller. Alan, who's originally from Chicago, currently resides in California, where he works with counterculture labs. And as we're about to find out tonight, when he's not in California studying fungi, he's likely to be in Mexico studying the great diversity of hongos mexicanos just south of our border. As someone who speaks Spanish and someone who's traveled to Mexico many times, I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to tonight's lecture. Bienvenido a nuestro grupo, Alan. Es un placer.
Thank you very much. Well, I've been going to Mexico for mushrooms since about 2007. Mushroom season in Mexico is very good, both in general and also right now. I've been paying attention to the Mexican mushrooms on iNaturalist. And so right now, there's more mushrooms coming in iNaturalist than I can identify. So up until about a week ago, I was able to identify all the mushrooms that were put on iNaturalist in Mexico. But right now, there's just too many for me to keep up. So if any of you guys like to identify mushrooms on iNaturalist, definitely check out the ones coming in from Mexico, because there's a lot of cool stuff coming in right now. Season is pretty good and will probably continue to be pretty good until October or so, at least in southern Mexico. I'm going to start out in Baja, California. I live in Oakland, so Baja, California is just south of me, about 8-hour drive. Most of Baja is pretty dry, but there's a few places in Baja that have a lot of mushrooms. So a lot of it looks like this. But you also have a lot of coast there, and the coast of Baja is really beautiful. There's like almost nobody on it compared to the California coast, and lots of fog and dew right on the coastline there. And then there's some mountains in Baja that have lots of conifers and oaks, and this here is Pinus muricata, which is one of the common pine trees that we get in California. It's an ectomycorrhizal host for lots of porcini and all sorts of other stuff. But the main mushroom habitats in Baja are the coast live oak habitat just south of San Diego, and also San Pedro Martir, which is about 4 hours south of San Diego. And that's a place that's almost exactly in habitat like Yosemite. It has white fir, sugar pine. It's a really beautiful place. And then in the very south, you have Sierra de la Laguna, which is the mountain that's at the southern tip of Baja. And that one has hundreds of plant species that don't occur anywhere else in the world, and lots of really interesting mushrooms too. Here's a desert mushroom, Podaxis. So these you just find way out in the middle of the desert. Pretty cool things, kind of related to agaricus. And then another common desert mushroom are these puffballs that grow on stalks. So this one is Bacteroides digwettii, and often I find these under mesquite. Here's some Morchella rufibranea, and these I found about 2 hours south of San Diego along the coast. And there's a lot of Knowlenia in Baja, California. Here's one, and here's another one closer to Knowlenia adulis. And in northern Baja, you have a lot of coast live oak habitats. So you get a lot of this very similar mushrooms that we get under coast live oak in California. This one is Swellellus amygdalinus. It's a good edible. And then here's this one's probably the Aureoboletus flaviparus, I think is this one here. And you can see the pores kind of going down the stem a little bit. And this Xerocamelus dryophilus is really common. and it gets eaten by Hypomyces microspermus. So Hypomyces chrysospermus prefers to eat porcini, whereas Hypomyces microspermus has spores that are half as big and likes these little xerocamellas. There's a lot of Helvellas. This one is compressa. And then there's a lot of Amanitas. This one I sequenced, and turns out it's a new species in the Amanita novanupta group. And this one's real unusual. It's an ossicollis, and it's growing on cow manure. And then you have the Zomphilotus olivacens. These have a ton of color in them. So they're often used to make dyes or paint. You can use them to make watercolor paint, and they glow in the dark. And there's a bunch of these big entelomas. This one I call Livido album. And lots of interesting Cortinarius. This one looks like a Satharella, but it's actually Parasola auricoma, real common on the West Coast. And there's a lot of real mysterious Satharellas in the Baja area. I've sequenced some of them, and they always come out like not really with any GenBank matches. So I think the Satharella just has not been studied very much down there. Here's Agrossibi PD80s. This one I sequenced, and it matched the Agrossibi PD80s from the East Coast of the United States, and also the same species all over Europe. It's pretty much the same thing worldwide. And then this Canthomyces rosellis is very common in the spring in both San Diego and Baja. And Agaricus californicus is a big poisonous agaricus that likes the coast live oak. And now we'll take a look at Oaxaca. Oaxaca is down in the southeast corner of Mexico. The habitat of Oaxaca is much different than the habitat of Baja. It shares a lot more species in common with the East Coast mushrooms of the United States. The western stuff is separated by the Rocky Mountains, and a lot of species don't cross that. So here is a lentinus, something around Lentinus crinitis or Betrori or something. And there's a lot of really good hygrossibi type things in Oaxaca. I think none of these are really hygrossibi sensu stricto. It's more like humidicutus. And most of them are undescribed. Some of them are described from like Costa Rica, but really good diversity of colors and textures in these things. There's one that people usually call Hygrossibi miniata, but we don't really have Hygrossibi miniata in North America. And these green hygrossibes are really cool. Oh, I'll go back to that. These green hygrossibes tend to always grow on moss, so they probably are living off the moss. And this one I found in Oaxaca, but I've also seen it in Michoacan and Chiapas. So really cool color in this. And then this one is Helosis caenescens, and it is not a mushroom, but it's a parasitic plant. And here's a slime mold, Plasmodium, just starting to turn into something recognizable. And another slime mold, some sort of Trichia. And then here is the same thing when it gets older. This one is Neopaxillus dominicanus, and this one took me about 5 years to identify. There was all sorts of suggestions online, and the microscopy wasn't very helpful, but my collection got moldy. So I tried sequencing it using the ITS1F and ITS4B reverse primer, and the 4B reverse primer was able to ignore all the mold, and I was able to get a good sequence out of it. And that's how I finally figured out what this one was. This is Mycena spinosima. There are a lot of really cool mycenas all over Mexico. This is one that I found at about 3 in the morning in Sierra Mije in Oaxaca. And it didn't have a name when I found it, but it's now known as Mycena lumina. And Mycena lumina is really cool because it glows in the dark. And so this is a picture that I took, and the way I found it was just by walking through the woods at night without any light. These glow really brightly. And this one is Cotylidia. And there's a lot of real interesting marasmioid type things. This one maybe Marasmius cladophilus, Cantharella cinnabarinus group. And here's my favorite mushroom, Lepiota trichroma. This one has bright orange colors, and then when you touch it, it turns bright green. So really interesting thing. And then the spores are kind of in the shape of a shield. And here's another entoloma. I have no idea which one, but found in a kind of tropical area in lower elevation in Oaxaca. And this one is also entoloma, or perhaps inocephalus, with the really acute umbo. And this one is another entoloma. I think ended up being something like Entoloma panuccidus or something like that. It's really big. It's like 8 inches tall. And really cool stem texture. And then this entoloma, also really cool. I got a good sequence of it. It doesn't really seem to match anything. But I find this one in Oaxaca and Veracruz in the oak forests. And here's Cortinarius violaceus. I found a bunch of these in Mexico and did microscopy on all of them. They generally turn out to be Cortinarius violaceus sensu stricto in Mexico. So it's one of the few Cortinarius that's super easy to identify and a good edible. The spores show up really well in this photo with the flash. And there's a lot of Amanita in Mexico. Sort of like the East Coast, the Amanita diversity is really high. This one is section Caesariae. The taxonomy of section Caesariae is pretty confused, so I don't usually put names on these, but it's very commonly eaten edible. Here is Hymioporus betula. These are also good edibles with a cool stem texture. And lobster mushrooms are real common all over southern Mexico. And here is a Chalciparis. The bolete diversity in Mexico is very high as well. Here, this one is maybe something like Hemiluxinum rugosipes. And there's a lot of bird's nests as well. Gloeophyllum saparium is really common. And I always like to take macro photos of this, of the underside. They always turn out really good. You can kind of see the cystidia in this one. And there's a ton of lentinus. This one, they are now calling Lentinus flexipes. And this one is real interesting. It's an Oroscalpium, but not the common Oroscalpium. I think the name of this one is Oroscalpium villosa. And it's not nearly as woody as the Oroscalpium vulgaris that we usually have. And this one looks similar, but it has pores. This is Pseudofistulina, probably Pseudofistulina radicata. And this one I found for sale at a market in Oaxaca. They eat it and sell it commercially there. I like the way the spores and this one here turned out. They look like silver coins. And there's a lot of Copernella disseminatus. Here is Psilocybe zapaticorum. This one I found in a landslide in Oaxaca. And Psilocybe Hoopshigenii also grows in landslides in Oaxaca. This one is kind of at lower elevations than Zapaticorum, and I got a good sequence off this one, and it's was surprised to find that it's closely related to Psilocybe mexicana. This one, I used to think it was a Galerina, but now I'm thinking it's more like closer to Cortinarius acutus. And there is just a ton of Mycena diversity. Here's my favorite lichen, Herpethalon rubrosynctum. It's really common in Oaxaca and Veracruz, and then it's only been seen once over in Jalisco. I think Damon Teague found it over there. Real cool colors. They call it a Christmas lichen. And then here's another lichen. This one might be Dibaeus beomyces, but there's a bunch of different species and genera that make these pink fruiting bodies. And here is Cucaina. Lots of Halvellas in Mexico. Most of them have no scientific name yet. For now, they call this one Halvella crispa, though the sequence differs quite a bit, and it's sold in the markets. This is the one that passes for Halvella lacunosa, but again, the sequence differs quite a bit from the Halvella lacunosa in Europe and also from the ones that look like this on the west coast of the United States. Here's one that eats agave, Coleotrichium agaves. And there's lots of really cool earth tongues. This one is a trichoglossum due to the little hairs all over it. And this one is Cordyceps tenuipes. So when I find something like this, you can dig under there and they have a bug that it's coming up out of. Here is a cool little one. This one is Smaragdea. The genus is Dendrostilbella, so Dendrostilbella Smaragdea. And here's a market in Oaxaca, and what she has for sale here is Schizophyllum communi. And she recommends that it's used to make soups. So just north of Oaxaca is Veracruz. And Veracruz kind of continues the cloud forest habitat that's real common in Oaxaca. In both Oaxaca and Veracruz, you have the high elevation on top of the mountains, and that's where all of the edibles occur. At these cold, really high places, the mushrooms that grow really large do really well. And then lower in elevation, kind of the middle elevations, like 1,400 to 2,200 meters, you have the cloud forests. And the mushrooms there are smaller and much more diverse. And then when you go below 1,400 meters, it gets into the tropical habitats. And the mushrooms there are even smaller and much different. So there's some edibles in the cloud forest, not so much in the tropical areas. Here is cordyceps here. You can see these are on Coleoptera larvae. So these are like mealworms. And this one is really cool looking. This is Phaeoclavulina cyanocephala. Really pretty Romaria looking thing. Does not stain blue, but it has lots of blue color and is edible. And here is some kind of Mycena. I think when I finally end up working on this one, it probably won't end up being Mycena sensu stricto. It looks like one of those other genera that they split off, like Mycena. And there's a lot of russulas in Mexico. Mostly they apply names from the United States or Europe, and most of those names are misapplied. So I don't try too hard to put names on Mexican russulas because all the ones I've sequenced have been something other than what I thought they were. This one is pretty cool. It is, I forget the genus. The species is Braziliensis. So this one grows in kind of tropical areas. It's edible. Ripotitella is the genus. So Ripotitella brasiliensis has kind of ornamented spores. This, I have no idea what it is, but I thought it looked cool. Maybe Phanerochaete. And the Ganoderma here is Ganoderma curtisii. I've sequenced a couple of the curtisiis in Mexico. They have about 2 base pairs, a consistent 2 base pair difference from the curtisii in the United States. So you could probably call it a new species or a different form. And there's lots of Xylaria. This one is a Hemimycena. It's really tiny. The whole thing is only about 1 millimeter tall. And then here is Mycena margarita. And Mycena margarita glows in the dark occasionally, though in my experience, they don't. At least this one here doesn't. But it's real cool looking. And this one is an Amanita in the Pantherina group, probably Amanita xylinovolva. So like Amanita muscaria, it contains muscimol, which makes it sort of poisonous. And here's a Lycogala. I used to call it Lycogala epidendrum when it was pink, or terrestre when it's orange. This one was kind of halfway between pink and orange. And a new paper just came out on Lycogala that said there's really more like 32 species. Here is Areobolides flaviparus. It has a real viscid cap, good edible. And Paneola cinctulus is a hallucinogenic mushroom that grows here in cow manure. More often it's seen in lawns. And there's a lot of Paneola species in Mexico. This one has kind of a thicker reddish stem than some of the lookalikes and jet black spores. This one is Paneola cyanescens. I found it right next to that Paneola cinctulus. This one stains blue very strongly and is real common in cow manure and horse manure at the lower elevations. So anywhere from like sea level to about 1,400 meters elevation. This one's all over the place. You can see it stains blue pretty well. And the blue staining they recently discovered is psilocin polymerization. So when you touch it, the cells break. There's some enzymes that polymerize the psilocin and give it this blue color. Now in boletes, the blue color is caused usually by variegatic acid. And one difference is with these boletes, you cut it, it stains blue, and then 20 minutes later you go back and the blue is gone. Or if you cook it, the blue goes away. So it's not nearly as persistent. Whereas with the psilocybin mushrooms, they stay blue even when they're dry for long periods of time. This bolete, I have no idea what it is. There's a lot of boletes in Mexico, and a lot of undescribed species, though a lot of the Eastern names do apply pretty well. Here is Psilocybe neohalapensis, which is described from Jalapa and is one of the psilocybes that grows in the cloud forest. A lot of psilocybes like the human disturbed areas with wood chips or kind of like on the edges of creeks or roadsides, but these, I find them way in the middle of nowhere where people would never go. So they have a lot of color, so you can't see the blue staining very well. And they have the odor of oil paint and cucumber. And then at the bottom, you see a deflexula. Here's a real interesting hygrocybe. And this one was recently named Mycena puncissima. And it is a Mycena from section Longicete. So Mycena section Longicete has these really long setae that are on top of the cap and then shorter setae on the stem. So this one kind of resembles like a punk hairdo. This thing is really tiny and it's only known from a couple locations in Mexico. This is how they start out. They have a lot of really cool entelomas in Mexico. This one close to Entoloma cellulatum for the bright blue gill edges. That's what the other side looks like. And this one, apparently extremely rare. I've only seen it once. And it looks like Gomphis, but it's actually in the genus Gloeocantharellus. So this is the only record of Gloeocantharellus from Mexico. There's another record from Hawaii, but in general, it's a super rare genus. Though in this particular day, they were all over the place in this little area. There was about 100 of them. And then here, this one is, let's see, this is Clitosibula. And I sequenced this one. It matched some sequences from Tennessee. So I think a good name for it is Clitosibula cyanea. But pretty cool colors in this one. And then here, this one is Tylopolis obscurus. There's a lot of Tylopolis in Mexico. Most of them probably don't have names. This one probably doesn't have a name, but Roy Hulling said it looked like obscurus, so that's the name I'm gonna apply until a better one comes along. This one's ectomycorrhizal with oak, and you can see the oak leaves in the background. One of the reasons that it's the diversity is so high in Mexico for a lot of these is they have a lot of different species of trees. There's over 100 species of oaks, over 100 species of pines, and then just countless other trees there. So that gives rise to very good mushroom diversity. Here's another Tylopolis. Some people suggested some names. I don't know if any of them really apply. I'll just leave it as Tylopolis. But that was also there with that same oak. And here's the Lycoperdon. There's a lot of really cool Lycoperdons in Mexico. And then on the right, we have Psilocybe mexicana. So this one likes to fruit early in the season. It has a very strong cucumber odor. It likes to grow in grass. This one here is really cool. It is Mycena globulispera, which was recently described from Brazil. And then Gymnopus iocephalus, smells terrible, kind of like burning rubber. And here's some kind of marasmias. There are a lot of marasmias in Mexico. This one I used to call Colibia aurea, but recently it's been moved into Tricholamopsis. So now it's Tricholamopsis aureum. Has really good color, edible. I see it in the cloud forests. And this one, I have no idea what it is, but I thought it looked cool. Would have to sequence it to find out. And here's a hygrocybe. I think Jean Lodge said that this one's probably Hygrocybe occidentalis. Really nice gill color. And Psilocybe cubensis is very common on cow manure in Mexico. Occasionally horse manure. Sometimes they even find it in the middle of the road. And some more Mycena spinosima. Here is a Laternea, something like Laternea pusilla. You can see they hatch out of eggs, pretty cool looking things. They don't smell as cool as they look. This Gymnopus is kind of interesting. It smells like burnt rubber, and it makes these rhizomorphs that can fly several inches through the air. And often these rhizomorphs will tie sticks together. About 1% of the time that I find it, it has actual mushrooms. Usually it's just these sticks with the rhizomorphs. But if you taste the rhizomorphs, you kind of get this strong burnt rubber taste, which the mushrooms also have, so you can tell what it is. And there's some pretty cool Falaceae in Mexico. This one is Phallus Oreo. Let's see, it was Phallus Oreo. I forget the name, but it hatches out of eggs. And it was described from Brazil recently by Larissa, who identified this for me. And this one has like a unusually sweet smell in the top. I think it's like Phallus Aureolatus. This one here is Armillaria suspitosa. There's a lot of Armillaria in Mexico. Armillaria suspitosa is not in Armillaria yet. It's only been described in Desarmillaria, but I'm going to publish the combination because I don't think Desarmillaria should be an actual genus because it's sister to Armillaria and shares so many characteristics. So unnecessary split. And here is, this one is Crepidotus cinnabarinus. And this one's pretty rare. And every time I've found the Crepidotus cinnabarinus, I've also found some white ones on the same stick. So I wonder if the white ones are the same. I imagine they probably are. And sometimes it has color and sometimes not. And then the last place I'll talk about is Jalisco over on the West Coast. Jalisco has really good mushrooms. Lots of really interesting habitat there, lots of pines and oaks. This is Camarops Peter's eye. I've only found it once in Mexico. I think it's pretty rare where you guys are in the eastern United States, or pretty common in the eastern United States. But it has this kind of texture, almost like a wet dog's nose. And then this one is a little Mycena. And I found it by walking through the woods at night. It doesn't glow in the dark, but it makes the stick glow in the dark. So the mycelium of this one glows pretty brightly. This one, I have no idea what it is. I found it again walking through the woods at night. But it has these rhizomorphs that kind of fly through the air and glow in the dark. So these I found in a place called Valle de Maple, the maple forest in Jalisco. There's really only a couple maple forests in Jalisco, or only a couple maple forests in Mexico, well, also two in Jalisco, and they have very unusual habitat, really good mushrooms there. So these are like glowing bottle brushes. Here's some Psilocybe zapaticorum, really strong hallucinogenic mushroom that grows in landslides. Pretty common in the cloud forests of Jalisco. And then Psilocybe cerulescens was described from Alabama. And then it turns up all over Georgia, where Paul Stamets thought it was a new species, Psilocybe wileyi. And then it's all over the cloud forests of Mexico, both in the east and the west. And recently, somebody sequenced a Psilocybe cerulescens from Ecuador, and it matched these other sequences perfectly. So this one is pretty widely distributed, it's even in the Caribbean, and it grows in landslides, gets pretty big. There is Lactarius indigo, and Leticia Montoya is going to publish a new paper on Lactarius indigo pretty soon, which will split it into at least 4 different species. Chlorophyllum molybdites is pretty common in the warmer, grassier areas. You can see the green spore print on the back of these. Here's another Psilocybe zapaticorum. This one I found in an old sawmill. So the sawmill got shut down about 15 years ago, and now there's just thousands and thousands of these covering the place. Here is a Lactocolibia. Turns out Lactocolibias are pretty common in Mexico, these little white coloboid things. And here's an Inocybe in the Inocybe geophila group. Brandon Matheny had this paper on the Inocybe lilacina complex, and he named a bunch of species from the United States. But this one is not one of the species he named, so there's a bunch more in this complex to be named. This one is really funny. I'm guessing it is a Craterellus because it had a hollow stem, but I've only seen it once. And Hypomyces lactiflorum likes to grow on the Russula brevipies type things, and it's very popular in Mexico and very often sold in markets. In the cloud forests near the coast in Jalisco, I see a lot of Psilocybe youngensis. This is one of the few psilocybes that I see in Mexico that grows directly from well-decayed wood. And I think this is the last one I have for you guys, and then I can take questions if you have any. This one is really cool. It is a Rhodoarenia. And Rhodoarenia is usually really rare, but in some places it gets real common. It's rubbery, it smells like sulfur, and has a really interesting stem texture. Looks really cool. And here's my contact information. And let me know if you have any questions on any of this stuff.
So I would say three things, Alan. I should have had you give the red, white, and blue introduction, because obviously the blues that you have come up with have far surpassed anything I might even have any concept of. Secondly, I have never seen an array of, it's hard to believe, I guess, that you found these mushrooms and you pose them all so neatly. And, it's rare we find more than one or two. To find the whole collection and then laid out almost in an Art Deco is pretty amazing. So I'm sort of in awe. But Elizabeth, if you would please look at the chat room to see if we have questions, and people have already asked, and if not, I'm sure we could try to do questions from the floor.
Yeah, Annie wanted to know if you have any idea why the psilocybin mushrooms tend to be growing in landslides so often.
I have no idea. There's a lot of people that like to guess, and it's probably something to do with competition for food. In these landslides, a lot of organic material gets pulled down underneath the soil. But exactly how that really relates to them growing there, I'm not sure. But in addition to landslides, I also find them near creeks and rivers pretty often. So maybe that's sort of a similar habitat with the mighty riverbank there. But there's 4 species of mushrooms in Mexico that they call durumbes, which means landslides, landslide mushrooms. And they all are found in landslides, some at higher elevations, some at lower elevations. And they're not all closely related. So it's definitely something that they do for a reason, but I do not know what that reason is.
Interesting. Johnny asked if you have to take precautions to avoid areas of violence lately in Mexico.
I don't take any precautions in Mexico, and I've never had any problems with violence. I think, most of the problems are inside the big cities. Once you get out into the country, everyone's always been pretty cool. And, these forests, a lot of them are national parks. There's no reason for anyone to do anything violent in a national forest, or, it'd be hard for them to even find you out there. Because, if a criminal's going to rob somebody, they're going to rob somebody in a city where the tourists are concentrated. So I don't really worry about it. And none of my friends that hunt mushrooms have ever had any problems with violence in Mexico. So no, it's not really a concern.
Tom is asking about frost bolete, because he's heard that is a common edible in Mexico. Have you seen it? Do you know how people prepare it there?
Yeah, I see that one a lot. We used to call it Boletus frostii, now maybe Exudoporus frostii or Butyriboletus frostii. But yeah, it's really common, and it kind of has this taste like lemony, and it's even lemony after I cook it up. I think it's a slightly different species than what you call frostii in the United States. And it's definitely a popular edible mushroom in Mexico. Um, in Mexico, they prepare mushrooms a little bit differently than in the United States. Here, I do a lot of sauteing of mushrooms, kind of like at a high temperature. In Mexico, often they'll like kind of toss them in soup, so they end up getting boiled in soup. Um, or they'll kind of like fry them up and put them in quesadillas and tacos and soups and stuff like that. Um, but I, most mushrooms don't really have an exact like you prepare this mushroom this way. I think a lot of mushrooms do well with a lot of different preparations.
Jacob's asking, are there any morels in Morelos?
Yeah, there definitely are. I have found a few species of morels in Mexico. In Morelos, I believe you would find Morcella tridentina to be the most common morel. And that one, it gets real common at high elevation conifer forests. I've seen them at Popocatépetl and other high elevation forests. And sometimes I'll find them in burned areas. So there's burned morels. And then a lot of times I'll find them in unburned areas, just natural morels. And then at lower elevations, I find more like Morcella rufibranea. But morel season in Mexico is typically very late in the season. So after all of the other mushrooms are just about done, late October, November, December, if the rains continue, that's when the morels fruit.
Interesting. I noticed that you didn't have a lot of polypore pictures. Is that just because you're not focusing on them, or is the distribution of types of mushrooms different?
Oh man, there's so many cool polypores in Mexico. And I do like them, but I'm not very good at identifying them. So I think, when I make these talks, I just flip through my observations on Mushroom Observer and throw the pictures into a PowerPoint. And I think I just figured people would be a little bit less excited about polypores, and I don't know what to call them. I do know Ricardo Valenzuela, who's a really excellent polypore expert in Mexico City. And one time I went through all of my Mushroom Observer observations in his herbarium with him, and he was able to put names on a lot of them. So that really helped. And then some of them I've sequenced, but still, usually when I find a polypore in Mexico, I can't identify it. And I don't want to bother Ricardo all the time because he runs the herbarium at Polytechnico, and he's real busy. But yeah, I could make a talk like just polypores of Mexico, and it would probably have less than 10% of all the polypores that occur there.
Yeah. Someone asked, are there many mushroom clubs in Mexico?
There are no mushroom clubs in Mexico. Maybe one in the north, but I've never been to any of their things. I think they call themselves a club. It's, I want to say Chihuahua, or kind of like northwestern Mexico. But Mexico doesn't really have mushroom clubs like the United States has mushroom clubs. A lot of the people that hunt mushrooms in Mexico are indigenous people that kind of learned it from their parents and their grandparents. And then a lot of the people that hunt mushrooms in Mexico are biologists who learned in the university about the mushrooms. But yeah, there's no like real recreational mushroom clubs like we have in the United States.
Interesting. I'm trying to keep track of all these here, sorry. You mentioned that the mushrooms get smaller as you go down in elevation and get more tropical. Is there a theory about why that would? I would expect more moisture to make the mushrooms bigger.
Yes, I have some ideas about that. Really quick about the mushroom clubs, they don't really have clubs, but they do have fungus fairs. And so if you want to go do mushrooms with a bunch of other people in Mexico, these fungus fairs are a really good opportunity. The best ones are in Oaxaca, the middle of July, a place called Cuajimaloyas. There's really high elevation, so tons of edible mushrooms up there. So that one's really cool. And then the middle of August, there's one in Michoacan that's really good, and it's put on by the government of that city. And there's like tables with hundreds of species of mushrooms out on them there. And then there's a few others, but I started a Facebook group called Eventos de Hongos in Mexico. So if you're interested in all the different mushroom events in Mexico, you can follow it there, and they pretty much all get posted to that page. And there's also a page that's very similar, but the United States, called Mushroom Events of the USA, where I post all the mushroom events. But up at high elevation, what seems to work really well is really large mushrooms. And the mushrooms, at high elevation, it's very cold. A lot of times it freezes. And I'm not sure why large mushrooms work so well at high elevations, but they definitely do, because it's kind of consistent across lots of different genera. You have, really big chanterelles, really big porcinis, all sorts of really big mushrooms up at the tops of the mountains. And then as you go down in elevation, like for every 100 meters you go down, you'll notice the mushrooms getting smaller until at sea level. Most of them are very small. And I think the strategy that works well at the more tropical areas is a mushroom that fruits real quickly and then can sporulate before it rots and gets eaten by bacteria. So that might have something to do with it, but that's just a guess.
Yeah, yeah. Someone asked what's your strategy or advice for finding bioluminescent fungi? Sounds like you're out in the middle of the night.
Yeah, well, there's two main strategies for finding bioluminescent mushrooms. One of them is just to collect all the mushrooms that I think might be bioluminescent and put them in a tackle box, and then either go into a really dark room or wait for it to get dark. And then I take a picture of my tackle box at the highest ISO that I can with my camera, and with the aperture all the way open. So that's like 30 seconds just on the whole tackle box. At the highest ISO, it's like ISO 200,000. So the picture is terrible quality with lots of grain, but it makes it extremely sensitive. So then I can see which compartments of my tackle box are glowing. And then I'll take longer exposures that are much better quality with lower ISO of the ones that are glowing once I find out which ones are. The other strategy is more fun and probably a little more effective, and that's just to walk at night with no light. And what I like to do there is I pick out a place to walk during the day. So like a trail that doesn't have any cliffs on it. If I can find like a paved pathway, that's really nice, because you can feel when you're going off the trail. Usually you don't find paved pathways through the woods in Mexico. So just like, any kind of trail that doesn't have too many cliffs or holes off to the side, or at least I take note of where they are, is really helpful. And then I like to wear glasses, both to make the little pinpoints of light a little bit sharper, but also so sticks don't poke me in the eye. And I walk very slowly, like it'll take me about 5 minutes to go about 100 yards and just look all over the place. Takes about 3 minutes for my eyes to adjust to the dark, and after about 5 minutes, they seem to be all the way adjusted. All the bioluminescent mushrooms glow green, always the same shade of green, about 535 nanometers. And they really like areas that are real wet, so often near water. If there's trails that kind of go along a creek, that's really ideal. And it has to be really, really dark out. So if it's not really dark, everything in the forest is glowing from the moonlight or light from a city. So if you are near a big city, you need to go on a clear night, because on a clear night, all this light from the big city just goes straight up into space, and it gets very dark, even kind of near the city, right next to it. And also, I pay attention to the phase of the moon. So there's like these free Android apps that tell you where the moon is. And so if the moon is not a new moon, then I look at the moonrise and moonset times and go out either very early in the morning or very late at night. And I kind of know when the moon's going to rise and ruin everything. And then, when there's a new moon, you can just go around there all night.
Cool. Cole asked how you go about sequencing mushrooms, and I'm not sure if he means just like how do you personally make it happen, or like what's the process more generally. But do you want to talk a little bit about that? Sounds like you're doing it a lot.
Yeah, so I do what's called Sanger sequencing, and what it does sequences a very tiny bit of the mushroom genome. So mushrooms have about 40 million base pairs in DNA code, so it's like a text file that's 40 million bases long. And I'm looking for a snippet of that that's between 600 and 1,000 bases. And these snippets are pretty inexpensive to sequence. Like I can do it for around $10. Which is almost free compared to how cool the data is that I get back. So you can use fresh or dried mushrooms. Fresh works a little bit better, but dried still works pretty well. And I extract the DNA with sodium hydroxide and a few other chemicals that I mix up myself, and then put them into a PCR reaction. And PCR machine runs for a couple hours, and then I do gel electrophoresis to see if the PCR worked. And if it does, then I send it off to a lab that sequences PCR products. You can use GeneWiz or Eurofins, and then you get the data back a couple days later, and then you got all your sequence and you blast it and build phylogenetic trees. But I just did a talk on this, which is on YouTube. So if you go to the fungal sequencing Facebook group, I'm pretty sure I posted it in there. Probably just searching YouTube would pull up the talk, or just message me and I can link you to it. But the sequencing is not really too difficult. It's a bit time consuming and it's kind of foreign at first. But it's definitely something that can be done at home. You can set up a lab for under $1,000, get started sequencing stuff, or you can just mail stuff to like alvolab.es in Spain. I think they're charging about $22 for when you send them a little bit of dried mushroom to get a sequence back. So definitely a lot of ways to do it, and it gets more and more useful the more people do it and the more sequences get uploaded to GenBank. So I always put all of my sequences into GenBank and tie that sequence to Mushroom Observer and iNaturalist records, so then people can see what it is that I sequenced. So that makes the records a lot more useful than a lot of the GenBank sequences that just don't, you can't tell what it is they sequence, you don't know what it looked like. So it's hard to tell if it's really the right thing. But I think sequencing is really fun and cool, and it does what I was hoping that microscopes would do for me when I first got into microscopes, which is help me discover new species and figure out what is a new species and figure out exactly what is the thing that I have. If I sequence something and it doesn't come back with any good matches in GenBank, then the microscopes are still really useful to compare with the old literature. But in general, the sequencing is much easier than microscopy as far as a way to identify mushrooms. It's a lot faster and it's a lot more reliable. So I think it's a really good idea for more people to sequence more things more often. And I'm always happy to help people. If you want to help get a DNA lab set up at home, you can always message me sequencing questions or DNA analysis, sequencing that, processing the data questions. I'm always happy to answer messages like that.
Cool. We're just about at 9 o'clock, so we'll probably wrap up, but I'm curious to hear a little bit about how you got started looking for mushrooms specifically in Mexico. And then Kelly wants to know what advice you have for finding places to stay. I know when I've traveled, it's very easy to find information about how to travel to cities, but harder to find places to stay close to parks.
I got started going to Mexico in 2007. There was someone that posted pictures on a website called the Shroomery of Psilocybes zapotecorum and Psilocybes cerulescens, and they just looked like nothing else. None of the Psilocybes from the United States. And so I messaged him and asked him if I could come mushroom hunting with him And he's like, sure. And so I flew into Guadalajara, and he picked me up from the airport. And an hour later, I was just surrounded by psilocybe coalescens. And I was like, wow, this place is pretty magical. And so we just went around to all these national parks for about a week and saw just a huge diversity of mushrooms. There was a bunch of boletes that I photographed in that trip that I haven't seen since. So there is a lot to be discovered there. And I just kept coming back to Mexico every year after that for all my vacations because there was so much cool stuff there. And then he moved to Nicaragua in 2010, but by then I already had all my favorite places. And so I just keep going, and it's just, you know, it seems like in the United States, I'll find maybe like one mushroom per week that I'm like, wow, this is super amazing. I've never seen this before. And in Mexico, it's several mushrooms per day that I feel that way about. So definitely a good place to mushroom hunt. As far as finding places to stay, Airbnb is very popular in Mexico now. So I think Airbnbs are a good place, though. Usually when I go to Mexico, I just camp out. And what I usually do is just kind of drive off into the mountains and then find a little side road and then look for other little side roads and just look for roads that have plants growing in the middle of them. And once I find a road that has lots of plants growing in the middle, I drive as far as I can down to where that dead ends, and that's where I camp. Because you know, if there's plants growing in the road, people never go down there. And so I've camped out probably about 1,000 nights in Mexico and have not had any problems. Sometimes it gets real interesting in the morning with like cows stampeding around or you know, all sorts of stuff that happens. But it's always, you know, it's always been real cool. It's real nice to wake up and already be out in the forest. And it's not really like the United States where people will get really mad if you're like camping near their property or something like that.
Very cool. Well,
Okay,
this
I
has
think
been
we're-
great. I mean, I apologize to anyone whose question I didn't get to. I'm sure I skipped a few, but this has been fantastic, and your pictures were just amazing. This is really great.
Yeah, I was reminded of the story I read about the early days of the psychedelic mushroom, the diaspora of the people, the hippies going to Mexico, and some of the quotes of the people who had gone there. So you have, I would say, gone over and perhaps are the Pied Piper of the next movement. Maybe that's the next thing that's going to happen. One of the notes I read in the chat was, thank you for the fireworks. So and I guess that's a good way to sum this up in our red, white, and blue Independence Day. If anything would, the walk through the marvels of Mexico is certainly a fireworks end to the Independence Day holiday. And I thank you for that, Alan. And I guess we're going to sign off for tonight. So a good show, everybody. Thank you, Tom, for putting everything together. And so good night to all. And this ends the July 4th through the 6th Mycological Association of Washington meeting. Good night.
All right, nice seeing you all. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye now.